Inflation is a big concern for everyone right now. Individuals, companies, investors, politicians, all are worried about it. Inflation has been a big worry and topic of conversation for the last year to 18 months or so. In this video, we're going to be going through a hierarchy of different investing categories and how they rank in periods of inflation. All of this, according to Warren Buffett, who at 91 years old knows a thing or two about inflation because he's lived through it. During times when prices keep going up, having lots of cash isn't a good idea. Warren Buffett and Ray Dalio, who are super rich investors, don't like keeping cash when prices are rising. Ray Dalio even said something really catchy. Cash is trash. That's because when prices are going up, the cash you keep in a piggy bank or in a bank account becomes worthless every day, every week, every month, and every year. Here's the big thing to remember as an investor. You need to think about how much money you're really making after taking inflation into account. It's called your real return. It's simple math, really. Imagine your investments make you 10% more money in a year. Sounds awesome, right? Well, not so fast. It really depends on how much prices are going up. That's inflation. To figure out your real return, you have to subtract the inflation impact. So, if prices go up by 7% and your investments made 10%, your real return is only 3%. That's why cash isn't the best choice. When you keep cash for a long time, the rising prices can make your money worth less. Basically, holding on to cash means you're not really making any extra money because inflation is eating away at its value. At the top of the money ladder are fixed interest rate bonds. People usually think these investments are super safe, according to the typical advice on investing. However, Warren Buffett argues that they might not be as secure as they seem when you consider the effect of inflation. Let me break it down. Currently, the yield on a 10-year US government bond is about 1.8% as of making this video. If you decide to buy one now, you're essentially locking in a 1.8% yearly return for the next 10 years. Now let's talk about inflation. If, over the next decade, inflation averages around 4%, which isn't too far-fetched given recent reports showing inflation at 7%, your real return after factoring in inflation would be a negative 2.2% each year. Even though this is better than just keeping your money as cash, it's still far from the ideal scenario. When prices rise a lot, called inflation, some people win and others lose. If you own stuff like government bonds that promise a fixed return, inflation can make it less valuable. But if you borrow money with a fixed interest rate, like for a house, inflation can actually help you. Take my case. In December 2020, I bought a house using a mortgage that has a fixed interest rate for 30 years, which means my monthly payment stays the same no matter what. In times of inflation, this is a good deal. As prices go up, the value of money drops. So, the dollars I pay back for my house will be worth less over time. Let's say I owe $100 now. But because of inflation, next year's $100 might buy less stuff than it does today. So, when I pay back that $100 next year, it's like I'm paying back less because it doesn't buy as much as it used to. That's a plus for me because I get to pay off my loan using money that's not worth as much as when I borrowed it. Next on the list are unproductive assets, as mentioned by Buffett. These include things like gold, silver, and other precious metals. Having these isn't so bad when inflation is high because, in general, while everything else becomes more expensive, these items usually maintain their value. But here's the catch. These unproductive assets might not boost your ability to buy more things either. Warren Buffett clarifies this by saying, let's talk about another type of investment that's higher up in our list for dealing with inflation. These investors aren't just trying to keep up with rising prices. They want investments that can beat inflation and give us more money than we started with. This is where what Warren Buffett calls productive assets comes in. You might have heard of Warren Buffett. He made a lot of money by buying stocks in entire companies. But according to him, not all businesses are the same. Next in our list for handling inflation is what we call productive assets, or in simpler terms, average businesses. These businesses have a few things in common. One of them is that they need a lot of extra money, we call it capital, to keep running smoothly. Consider United Rentals, a major equipment rental company known by the stock market ticker symbol URI. They're a big player in the business of renting out heavy equipment, like bulldozers and trucks, which are commonly used in construction projects. Let's break down how their business works in a simpler way. United Rentals follows a straightforward model. First, they buy the equipment needed for construction jobs, such as bulldozers and portable restrooms. Once they have these items, they rent them out to construction projects for a short period, usually for the duration of the project. The idea is pretty simple. They make money by letting others use their equipment temporarily. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The equipment United Rentals owns doesn't last forever. After a few years, they need to replace it with new stuff. Let's take a bulldozer as an example. Imagine it costs United Rentals $1 million to buy one. Over its lifespan, they can rent it out, making $1.2 million in sales and enjoying a profit of $200,000. But let's throw a twist into the story. Suppose inflation is at 20%. Now, when United Rentals wants to buy a new bulldozer to replace the old one, they have to spend $1.2 million instead of the original $1 million. This means they can't pocket the profits. They have to reinvest all the money back into the business just to keep it running. I don't expect inflation to go up to 20%, hopefully. United Rentals is a really good company, but this example shows how companies that need a lot of money to run into problems when prices go up. Before we talk about another thing to watch out for in businesses during inflation, let me share a quick story. Warren Buffett's friend, Charlie Munger, once said something that fits well with what I just explained. There are two types of good businesses. One is where all the reported profit just sits there as extra cash at the end of the year. You can take that cash out and the business will still do well. The second type reports a profit, but there's never any cash. It's like the used construction equipment business. Every year, you make a profit, but it just sits there in the yard. There are a lot of businesses like that where you never have any extra cash. Now let's talk about another thing to avoid in businesses during inflation, the lack of pricing power. To explain, let's look at a company that does have pricing power. Apple. Apple has so many loyal customers that they'll pay whatever Apple asks for its iPhone. If someone wants a new iPhone, they won't buy a different brand just because it's cheaper. Having pricing power means a company can set its prices without losing customers. But some businesses struggle with this. They can't increase prices without losing customers to cheaper alternatives. These are the businesses you want to avoid during inflation because they might find it hard to keep up when prices go up. Consider a company that doesn't have much control over the prices of its products. For instance, think of a company that only makes plain white t-shirts. They don't have any fancy designs or logos, just basic plain t-shirts. Because there's nothing special about these shirts, people mainly care about getting them at the lowest price possible. This means the company can't really set higher prices than other similar t-shirt sellers because folks will just choose the cheaper option elsewhere. When there's inflation, it's tough for this company. The cost of making the shirts goes up. The materials, paying the workers, even shipping the shirts to customers all becomes more expensive. But the company can't really raise the price of the shirts to match these rising costs. So they end up squeezed. They're spending more to make the shirts, but can't charge more for them. That's why inflation hits these kinds of companies hard. Now let's talk about another kind of investment, productive assets or really good businesses. Imagine someone like John, who has $1 million. In one scenario, he spends it on buying a bulldozer for a business. But in another scenario, he invests that same amount of money in creating a software tool that helps people on YouTube make better videos. Let's say this software turns out to be a hit, and John makes a profit of $200,000 from it in the first year. The difference here is significant. Unlike the t-shirt company, John's software business has room to grow. Even if prices rise due to inflation, the software's value might increase too, or John might find ways to make more money from it. That's the magic of productive assets. they have the potential to keep growing and making more money, even when inflation hits. Imagine John is running a software business, and let's throw in a 20% inflation twist for this example. So, because of this inflation, John can now charge 20% more for his software this year compared to last year. If he had $1.2 million in sales last year, this 20% inflation would make it $1.44 million this year. Now, the cool thing about John's software business is that he doesn't need to pour a ton of money back into it. He already has the software, and while he might need to spend a bit on upgrades and maintenance, it's not a significant amount. This kind of business is the opposite of those that need a lot of capital, like the equipment rental company we discussed earlier. John's software business is what we call a capital-light business. In simpler terms, he doesn't have to keep funneling his profits back into the business to keep it running smoothly. Unlike the equipment rental company, where constant reinvestment is necessary, John can take his profits out of the business. This is great news for him. Now, if you're looking for a business that thrives during inflation, you'd want something different from the mediocre ones we talked about before. You'd want a business with low capital requirements. These are businesses that don't need massive amounts of money continuously poured in for growth. Often, these are businesses with strong brands, like Apple, Coca-Cola, or Warren Buffett's own See's Candies. Another type is businesses that don't heavily rely on physical assets like factories or tons of inventory, such as Microsoft, Facebook, or any software company, really. One important thing about a company when inflation is high is something called pricing power. It's like a company's ability to change its prices without scaring away customers. It's tricky to figure out, more like an art than a science, but here are some things to think about. Imagine if a company raised its prices by 10%. Some customers wouldn't mind at all, they'd still happily buy. Others would say, "No way, that's too expensive." When inflation happens and prices for things go up, it's smart to invest in companies that can easily raise their prices. These are the companies you want to own. On the other hand, it's not a great idea to invest in companies that struggle to increase prices even when things are normal. The key to fighting inflation is to invest in yourself. When you become exceptional at what you do, whether it's fixing cars, practicing law, caring for teeth, fixing pipes, or managing finances, you become super important to others. Being highly valued in a competitive market means you can set your prices and people will happily pay. That's the trick. I hope you liked the video and found it helpful. Remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Stay tuned for the next one.